Most people think power is the ability to make other people obey you. It isn't. Real power is the ability to remain in control when someone is deliberately trying to take control away from you. That is why disrespect is such a powerful test. Someone interrupts you, someone mocks you, someone speaks to you as if you are beneath them, someone ignores a boundary you clearly established. And suddenly, something inside you says, do something, react, defend yourself, prove them wrong, raise your voice, explain yourself, make them regret what they said. But the moment you react emotionally, you have already given them something valuable, control over your state. And powerful people understand this. They know disrespect is often less about what was said and more about what happens afterward. Anyone can look powerful when everyone treats them well. The real test begins when someone challenges their status, their authority, their identity, or their boundaries. That is when the difference becomes obvious. The insecure person reacts immediately. The powerful person observes. The insecure person tries to win the moment. The powerful person thinks about the consequences. The insecure person asks, "How dare you speak to me like that?" The powerful person asks, "What is this person trying to accomplish?" That single shift changes everything. Because when you stop seeing disrespect as an insult and start seeing it as information, you become much harder to manipulate. Someone's behavior begins revealing their intentions. Their timing reveals their confidence. Their persistence reveals their agenda. Their reaction to your boundaries reveals their character. And suddenly you are no longer trapped inside the emotional moment. You are studying it. That is where real control begins. The first thing powerful people understand about disrespect is that the first reaction is rarely the best reaction. When someone insults you, challenges you, interrupts you, dismisses you, or deliberately tries to embarrass you, your nervous system can respond before your rational mind has time to evaluate what happened. Your heart rate rises. Your attention locks onto the person. Your mind starts producing arguments. You suddenly want to prove something, defend yourself, or strike back. That reaction can feel like strength, but often it is simply a loss of control disguised as confidence. Powerful people create a gap between what happens to them and what they do next. That gap may only last a few seconds, but psychologically, those seconds are extremely valuable. Instead of immediately responding, they pause. They observe the person. They listen to the exact words being used. They notice the situation, the audience, the timing, and the intention behind the behavior. They don't allow someone else's emotional state to become their emotional state. Imagine someone making a disrespectful comment toward you in front of a group. The natural impulse is to respond quickly because silence can feel like weakness. You may think, if I don't answer immediately, they'll think they got away with it. But that assumption is often what makes people react exactly as their provocateur intended. The other person may be looking for an emotional response. They may want to make you defensive. They may want to shift the attention away from their behavior and toward your reaction. The pause changes that dynamic. When you don't immediately react, you give yourself the ability to choose your response instead of surrendering it to impulse. You can ask yourself whether the situation actually deserves your attention. Maybe the comment was careless rather than malicious. Maybe the person was testing a boundary. Maybe they were attempting to provoke you because they wanted attention. Maybe the correct response is a direct correction. Maybe the correct response is simply to disengage. The important thing is that you decide a powerful person doesn't need to respond simply because someone demanded a reaction. They understand that attention is valuable, and giving it away automatically is a form of weakness. If someone can say 3 words and completely control your mood for the next 3 hours, they have already gained influence over you without earning it. This doesn't mean powerful people tolerate everything. It means they respond deliberately. They can be extremely firm when necessary, but their firmness comes from clarity rather than emotional chaos. They might calmly say, "Don't speak to me like that." They might simply look at the person and continue the conversation. They might leave. They might address the issue later when emotions have settled. The difference is that their response is chosen. The goal is not to become emotionless. Anger can contain useful information. Discomfort can reveal a crossed boundary. Frustration can show you that something needs to change. But emotions are signals, not commands. You can notice anger without obeying it. You can feel insulted without becoming insulting. You can recognize disrespect without allowing it to determine your behavior. The next time someone tries to provoke you, resist the urge to prove yourself immediately. Take a breath. Slow the moment down. Observe before you answer. Let your mind return to the driver's seat before you decide what happens next, because the person who controls the pace of their own reaction is far harder to control by anyone else. One of the clearest signs that someone has lost control of a situation is the desperate need to explain themselves. When a person feels disrespected, misunderstood, or challenged, the instinct is often to start building a case for their own behavior. They explain what they meant, why they said it, what happened before, how they felt, and why the other person should understand their position. The more resistance they receive, the more they explain. But powerful people understand that excessive explanation can quietly turn confidence into defensiveness. You do not need to convince everyone that your boundaries are legitimate. You do not need to provide a detailed psychological report every time you say no. You do not need to prove that you deserve basic respect. When you constantly defend your decisions, you can unintentionally communicate that your decisions require someone else's approval. Think about the difference between saying, "I really don't appreciate the way you're talking to me, and I understand you're upset, but I have never meant to offend you, and maybe I could have handled things differently. But I just feel like we should communicate better because I don't want there to be tension between us." And simply saying, "Don't speak to me that way." The second statement is clear. It doesn't attack. It doesn't beg. It doesn't invite a debate about whether your feelings are valid. It establishes a standard. This doesn't mean you should never explain yourself. There are situations where clarification is necessary. In professional environments, relationships, or serious conflicts, communication matters. But there is a major difference between explaining something because clarity is useful and explaining yourself because you are afraid someone won't approve of you. Powerful people recognize that difference. When someone challenges their boundary, they don't immediately enter a negotiation. They communicate the boundary once. If the person understands, the situation can move forward. If the person continues, the powerful response isn't usually a longer explanation. It is action. You don't have to repeatedly tell someone that you won't tolerate disrespect if your behavior already demonstrates it. You can end the conversation. You can leave. You can reduce access. You can stop sharing personal information. You can create distance. Your actions make the boundary real. Imagine someone repeatedly interrupts you during a conversation. You explain politely that you'd like to finish speaking. They do it again. Instead of becoming increasingly emotional and delivering a speech about respect, you calmly stop engaging with the interruption. You finish your point. If the behavior continues, you can end the conversation or change the circumstances. The objective is not to defeat the person verbally. The objective is to make your position unmistakable. People often over-explain because silence makes them uncomfortable. They feel that if they don't keep talking, the other person might misunderstand them. But powerful people can tolerate being misunderstood temporarily. They know that not every person needs access to their reasoning. Your life does not require a defense attorney. There will always be someone who disagrees with your choices. Someone may dislike your boundaries. Someone may think you're too distant. Someone may interpret your confidence as arrogance. Someone may criticize you simply because your behavior no longer gives them the access they once had. You cannot control every interpretation. What you can control is whether you abandon your standards in an attempt to change those interpretations. Speak clearly. Say what you mean. Set the boundary. Then let your behavior carry the weight that your words no longer need to carry. Not every act of disrespect deserves the same response. Powerful people understand that before they react, they try to understand what is actually happening. They don't just hear the words. They observe the behavior behind the words. They ask themselves whether the person is careless, insecure, competitive, frustrated, testing a boundary, or deliberately trying to provoke a reaction. This small shift changes everything because you stop responding to the surface and start paying attention to the pattern. Someone making one rude comment does not automatically mean they are your enemy. People have bad moments. People communicate poorly. People make mistakes. But repeated behavior tells a different story. If someone constantly interrupts you, dismisses your opinions, mocks your decisions, or attempts to embarrass you in front of others, the pattern becomes more important than any individual incident. Powerful people don't rush to label someone after one moment, but they also don't ignore repeated evidence. This is where emotional control becomes a practical advantage. If you react to every slight with anger, you become predictable. A person who understands exactly what makes you angry can repeatedly use that information to manipulate your behavior. They know which words will trigger you, which subjects will make you defensive, and which situations will cause you to lose composure. Once they learn your emotional buttons, they don't need physical power or social authority. They simply press the right button. But when you observe before reacting, you become harder to manipulate. Imagine someone makes a sarcastic comment about you during a meeting. Instead of immediately confronting them, you notice what happened. Did they say it once? Did they look around to see whether others laughed? Do they repeatedly undermine you? Do they behave differently when certain people are present? Are they trying to gain attention, establish status, or make you appear less competent? These details matter. The goal isn't to become paranoid or assume that everyone has hidden motives. The goal is to become more accurate. Powerful people don't invent intentions without evidence. They watch behavior over time. They understand that actions repeated consistently are more reliable than words spoken occasionally. Someone can say, "I respect you," while constantly violating your boundaries. Someone can apologize while repeating the same behavior. Someone can act friendly privately but undermine you publicly. Instead of becoming trapped by explanations, you pay attention to what consistently happens. Parts reveal more than promises. This also helps you avoid unnecessary conflict. If someone accidentally says something offensive and immediately recognizes it, apologizes, and changes their behavior, there may be no reason to turn the situation into a battle. But if someone repeatedly crosses the same boundary after you've clearly addressed it, the situation has changed. Now you're no longer dealing with a misunderstanding. You're dealing with a pattern that requires a different response. Powerful people know the difference. They don't waste energy fighting every person who annoys them. They don't treat every disagreement as disrespect. They don't assume every criticism is an attack. Instead, they gather information before deciding what the situation deserves. Sometimes the answer is a calm correction. Sometimes it is a firm boundary. Sometimes it is distance. And sometimes it is complete disengagement. The important part is that the response matches the situation rather than the intensity of the emotion. When you start studying behavior this way, disrespect becomes information instead of a personal emergency. You begin noticing who respects boundaries, who only behaves well when they need something, who constantly seeks control, who becomes hostile when challenged, and who can disagree without becoming disrespectful, allowing you to respond to reality rather than reacting to the story your emotions create in the first few seconds. Powerful people understand that anger is often temporary, but consequences can change a relationship permanently. When someone disrespects them, their first instinct may be to feel anger, but they don't allow that anger to become the strategy. They understand that shouting, threatening, insulting, or trying to embarrass someone may create a moment of satisfaction, but it rarely creates lasting respect. Instead, they focus on what the behavior should cost in terms of access, trust, attention, or opportunity. Think about what happens when someone repeatedly crosses a boundary. You tell them once that you don't appreciate being spoken to that way. They apologize, then do it again. You explain yourself again. They apologize again. Then the behavior returns. At some point, another explanation becomes meaningless because the person already understands your position. What they haven't experienced is a meaningful consequence. A consequence isn't revenge. It isn't about hurting someone because they hurt you. It is simply the natural result of changing what you allow. If someone repeatedly wastes your time, you stop making yourself constantly available. If someone repeatedly breaks your confidence, you stop giving them sensitive information. If someone repeatedly disrespects you, you reduce their access to you. If someone consistently creates unnecessary conflict, you stop volunteering your energy to maintain the relationship. Your behavior becomes the message. This is powerful because you are no longer trying to control another person's personality. You are controlling your participation in the relationship. You can't force someone to respect you, but you can decide how much access they receive when they repeatedly demonstrate that they don't. Many people make the mistake of threatening consequences they never enforce. They say, "If you do that again, I'm done." But when the behavior happens again, nothing changes. Eventually, their words lose credibility. The other person learns that the boundary is negotiable. Powerful people avoid empty threats. If they communicate a boundary, they are prepared to act on it. They don't announce every consequence dramatically. They simply follow through. That creates consistency. And consistency is one of the foundations of authority. Imagine an employee repeatedly speaks disrespectfully during meetings. A manager who screams at them may create fear for a moment, but the emotional outburst doesn't necessarily solve the problem. A stronger response might be calm and direct. That behavior isn't acceptable in this environment. If it continues, the manager follows the appropriate process. The consequence is predictable, professional, and connected to the behavior. There is no need for humiliation, no need for revenge, no need to prove who is stronger. The behavior produces a consequence. This principle applies to personal relationships as well. If someone repeatedly cancels plans, lies, violates trust, or treats you as though your time doesn't matter, you don't have to keep giving them unlimited opportunities simply because you hope they will eventually change. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can do for yourself is change the amount of access that person has to your life. The key is emotional neutrality. You don't need to punish someone with anger. You don't need to announce that you're teaching them a lesson. You simply make a decision based on their behavior. And this is where real power becomes visible. The powerful person doesn't ask, "How can I hurt them?" They ask, "What access should this behavior receive?" That question shifts everything. Respect becomes connected to behavior. Trust becomes connected to consistency. Access becomes connected to responsibility. And when someone repeatedly demonstrates that they cannot handle the access you've given them, you don't have to argue with them about it. You simply change the level of access, attention, and trust you are willing to provide. Powerful people understand that they don't need to win every interaction. They don't need the last word, the loudest voice, or the approval of everyone watching. One of the strongest forms of self-control is the ability to walk away from an argument without feeling like you lost. When your sense of worth depends on proving yourself right, every disagreement becomes a threat. But when your confidence comes from within, you can tolerate being misunderstood without immediately launching into a defense. Think about how quickly a simple disagreement can become a competition. Someone challenges your opinion, and suddenly you feel the need to prove that you know more. They criticize your decision, and you start explaining every detail. They make a sarcastic comment, and you search for the perfect response. Before long, the original issue has disappeared, replaced by two people fighting for psychological victory. Powerful people recognize that trap. They understand that winning an argument does not necessarily mean winning the situation. You can prove someone wrong and still damage a valuable relationship. You can have the final word and still look insecure. You can dominate a conversation and still lose control of your emotions. The question isn't always, can I win this? The better question is winning this worth my energy? That question creates discipline. Not every disagreement deserves your full attention. Some people aren't looking for truth. They're looking for an emotional reaction. They want to pull you into endless debate because the debate itself gives them access to your attention. If you become desperate to correct every misunderstanding, you make yourself available to anyone willing to challenge you. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. Sometimes the strongest response is a short statement followed by silence. You can say, I understand your position without agreeing with it. You can say, we see this differently without spending 30 minutes trying to convert someone. You can say, that's not something I'm going to argue about, and move forward. This doesn't mean becoming passive. There are moments when you absolutely should defend yourself, correct misinformation, protect your reputation, or confront inappropriate behavior. Strength isn't silence at all costs. Strength is knowing when engagement creates value and when it simply feeds conflict. Powerful people also understand that time reveals what arguments cannot. If someone believes you're incapable, you don't always need to convince them immediately. If someone doubts your ability, your consistent results can answer more effectively than an emotional explanation. If someone misunderstands your character, you don't need to chase every opinion and correct every rumor. Your behavior over time becomes stronger evidence than your words in a single moment. This is why powerful people don't obsess over having the final word. They are comfortable allowing another person to believe they won an insignificant conversation. Their confidence isn't dependent on the other person's conclusion. There is a deeper psychological freedom in that. When you stop needing everyone to agree with you, people lose one of the easiest ways to control you. They can disagree without destabilizing you. They can criticize without forcing you into defense mode. They can misunderstand you without making you abandon your position. You become less reactive because your identity is no longer hanging on every interaction. The person who constantly needs to prove themselves is always waiting for someone to challenge them. The person who knows who they are doesn't need to turn every challenge into a battle. Sometimes you win by making your point. Sometimes you win by establishing a boundary. Sometimes you win by leaving. And sometimes there is no victory to pursue at all, because preserving your peace, your focus, and your control is far more valuable than proving to someone else that you were right. There is a difference between being powerful and simply being aggressive. Powerful people understand that protecting their standards does not require them to become cruel, arrogant, or intimidating. They can be firm without becoming hostile. They can say no without humiliating someone. They can enforce a boundary without turning the situation into a personal war. Their strength comes from self-control, not from their ability to make other people uncomfortable. When someone disrespects you, there is always a temptation to respond at the same level. They insult you, so you insult them. They embarrass you, so you embarrass them. They try to make you feel small, so you look for a way to make them feel smaller. In the moment, retaliation can feel satisfying because it creates the illusion that balance has been restored. but you have to ask yourself what you are becoming in the process. If someone behaves badly and your response is to become equally destructive, they have influenced more than your mood. They have influenced your character. Powerful people don't give someone else that much control. They understand that standards are not about controlling everyone around you. Standards are about deciding what you will participate in. You cannot force another person to speak respectfully, but you can decide whether you will continue the conversation. You cannot force someone to value your time, but you can decide how much access they receive. You cannot force someone to be trustworthy, but you can decide what information you share with them. That distinction creates tremendous freedom. Instead of trying to change the other person, you control your own response. A strong boundary can be simple. Don't speak to me like that. I'm not continuing this conversation if you keep insulting me. I won't participate in that. These statements don't require aggression. They communicate certainty. The mistake many people make is believing that a boundary needs anger behind it to be effective. It doesn't. In fact, a calm boundary can sometimes be more powerful because there is no emotional chaos for the other person to exploit. When you remain calm, you deny the situation the drama it may be trying to create. This doesn't mean you should tolerate disrespect in the name of being mature. Being calm and being passive are completely different. You can be composed while taking decisive action. You can remove yourself from a toxic situation. You can end a conversation. You can reduce contact. You can refuse an opportunity. You can change the terms of a relationship. The difference is that you aren't doing these things to punish someone. You're doing them to protect your standards. And there is another important principle here. Your response reveals what you value. If you constantly insult people when you're angry, you demonstrate that your standards disappear under pressure. If you can remain respectful while firmly defending yourself, you demonstrate that your principles are stronger than your emotions. That is a different kind of power. It doesn't require an audience. It doesn't require fear. It doesn't require revenge. It requires discipline. Someone may provoke you because they expect you to lose control. They may be waiting for you to say something cruel so they can use your reaction against you. If you give them that reaction, the original disrespect may become secondary. Now everyone is discussing how you responded instead of what caused the situation. Don't hand people that advantage. Protect yourself without becoming the person you are trying to protect yourself from. Keep your standards high, but keep your behavior under control. Be willing to walk away, but don't make a performance out of it. Be willing to say no, but don't use rejection as an opportunity to humiliate someone. Be willing to confront disrespect, but don't allow confrontation to become an excuse for cruelty. Because the strongest boundary is not the one that makes another person afraid of you. It is the one that allows you to remain completely in control of yourself, while making it unmistakably clear what you will and will not accept. There comes a point when the most powerful response to disrespect is to walk away, not because you are weak, not because you have lost, and certainly not because the other person has won. You walk away because you recognize that your time, attention, and emotional energy are too valuable to keep investing in someone who has repeatedly shown that they do not respect your boundaries. Many people stay in disrespectful situations far too long because they believe leaving means surrender. They think they have to prove their strength by staying, arguing, explaining, confronting, and eventually forcing the other person to understand. But sometimes the strongest decision is realizing that understanding is no longer necessary. You don't need everyone to understand why you are leaving. You only need to understand why you are leaving. There are people who don't want resolution. They want access to your emotions. They provoke you, wait for your reaction, and then use that reaction to continue the cycle. You explain yourself, they argue. You clarify, they twist your words. You defend yourself, they find another accusation. The conversation never ends because the goal was never understanding in the first place. Powerful people recognize when a conversation has stopped being productive. They stop trying to find the perfect sentence that will finally make the other person respect them. They understand that sometimes the problem isn't a lack of explanation. The other person already knows exactly what they are doing. That realization can change the way you handle relationships. If someone repeatedly violates your boundaries after you've clearly communicated them, you don't have to keep giving unlimited opportunities. If someone consistently insults you, manipulates you, creates unnecessary conflict, or treats your presence as something they can disrespect without consequences, you can reduce your involvement. You can become less available. You can stop sharing personal information. You can stop responding immediately. You can stop entering arguments. You can simply create distance. And the important part is that you don't need to announce every step. You don't have to say, I'm walking away because you disrespected me. Sometimes you just walk. There is tremendous power in removing yourself from an environment that constantly demands emotional reactions from you. When you leave an argument before it becomes destructive, you protect your peace. When you leave a relationship that repeatedly violates your standards, you protect your dignity. When you leave a conversation that has become nothing more than provocation, you protect your attention. Walking away also teaches you something important about yourself. It teaches you that you don't need to control another person's behavior to control your own life. You may not be able to make someone apologize. You may not be able to make them admit they were wrong. You may not be able to make them respect you, but you can decide whether they continue receiving access to you. That is a form of control nobody can take away unless you give it away yourself. Of course, walking away doesn't mean avoiding every difficult conversation. Some problems need to be confronted. Some boundaries need to be communicated. Some responsibilities require you to stay and deal with uncomfortable situations. Strength isn't running from difficulty. Strength is knowing the difference between a difficult situation that can be improved and a destructive cycle that keeps repeating itself. If the other person is willing to listen, change, and take responsibility, there may be something worth repairing. But if every attempt at resolution becomes another opportunity for disrespect, arguing, manipulation, or provocation, continuing the battle can become its own form of self-destruction. You don't prove your strength by remaining in every fight. You prove it by deciding which fights deserve you. Sometimes the most powerful sentence is never spoken. Sometimes the most powerful response is silence, distance, and a closed door. You don't have to destroy someone to protect yourself. You don't have to humiliate them to establish your worth. You don't have to win the argument. You simply have to recognize when your presence is no longer serving you. Because real power is not having the ability to dominate everyone who disrespects you. Real power is having enough control over yourself to know when to respond, when to set a boundary, and when to walk away without looking back. When you can leave without revenge, without desperation, and without needing the other person to validate your decision, you discover something important. Your peace is not something other people are allowed to negotiate.